when Sadie starts to cough, it's because I had to take her, well, I didn't take her, one of my staff took her to the vet yesterday. She started to cough on Tuesday night, and I thought yesterday it was just a ploy to get out of the budget statement. But she has got the equivalent of kennel cough, but she's fine. She's got tablets, and I didn't want anybody to get upset if she starts to cough. She's not choking to death. Although one or two of my speeches have led to that in the past. I'm very, very pleased to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Lord Mayor, ladies and gentlemen. I think there's a danger that all of us from the platform will be pretty much saying the same sorts of things. So I apologise in advance if speakers during the day have some of the things that they're saying. I think Michael Edwards, I'm sorry I should be back in Birmingham this afternoon and I won't hear Michael, but I think I would very much like to have heard what he had to say, and I hope that some of the things that I'm going to talk about will actually have a resonance with what Michael's talking about as well this afternoon. I'm really glad we can do song and dance now. I have been persuaded not to sing. I was going to do a version of I Did It My Way, but you're spared that. What we can do, and what we've started off doing this morning, is to be able to laugh. And I was here 3 weeks ago in Northern Ireland, and my good friend Paul Goggins, the Minister of State from the Westminster Parliament, read me from the Sunday World a wonderful story about a volunteer who was protecting squirrels in her garden. And the really amusing bit about it was that she was called Mrs. Nut. You've had your fair share of nuts over the last couple of centuries, and you're coming out of it with people working together, pulling together, creating a civil and civic society which underpins the political changes that have taken place in Northern Ireland. I've seen over my lifetime people against all the odds who have been able to survive, who have been able to create a sense of community, who have been able to pull together in extended families in circumstances which would have floored those people who are much better off, who have much better circumstances, living in much better accommodation. And it's only because of that mutual support and mutual action that people have actually been able to survive over the generations. In fact, in the 19th century, across the United Kingdom, around 10% of the population belonged to some form of mutual group. It was mutual groups that actually created the embryo welfare state, the old goose and burial clubs, goose for Christmas, burial for obvious reasons. The early trade union movement that actually was built on people's volunteering and coming together and providing together in times of greatest need. And the welfare state, built on that, now needs to inculcate those values of commitment and community over again. I'm not a Johnny-come-lately on the volunteering side, because it is a danger of all of us who get to public speak that we talk about anything except what we've actually done ourselves. And I was, some of you heard me say last night that when I was 16 I decided to volunteer, and I went down for a couple of years to see an old lady called Mrs. Plum. And I was leaving the area, the college I was at, and I went to tell her that I was going, and I really expected Mrs. Plum to say how grateful she was for all the time I'd committed to seeing her on a Saturday, and instead Mrs. Plum said how glad she was that she'd been able to make my life a little easier over the 2 years. And it is a mutual two-way process. People who are giving the greatest gift of all, which is of their time and of their being, actually get the most enormous reward. And at a time when, as Margaret was saying, more people are going to get employed here and across the United Kingdom and across the world, we actually need to know that retaining people's confidence and self-esteem will be achieved by people being engaged with the community around them. It isn't a substitute for paid work, it's a corollary of paid work. It's a way in which we can encourage those who have been long-term unemployed to be able to re-engage. It's a way in which those who immediately lose their job can keep contact with the social world around them. And we know that depression comes from people being literally confined to home, gradually losing contact with former workmates, people who have lost contact with friends. And therefore, there's a major issue for our health and well-being about what we're talking about today, and about giving and citizenship and volunteering. Some of you will know that I was heavily involved with my old professor and mentor, Bernard Crick, in getting citizenship teaching off the ground in schools in England and Wales. Obviously, everything is devolved in different ways now across the UK, and people have different approaches, but we commenced the citizenship courses back in the 2000, we laid the order, 2002 they came into our schools. And then we moved on to the issue of those coming into our community, seeking their home in our community from across the world. And we developed the citizenship programs and the ceremonies, which actually are held at Hillsborough Castle. I can't offer anything quite as grand in Sheffield, but the citizenship programs and the ceremonies for welcoming people who want to be naturalised UK citizens actually has been a tremendous boon, and people really warm to it. What is strange is that there is still an antagonism to developing that kind of commitment to citizenship and to being part of the community, the family that we are, from those actually born and brought up in our communities. And I am very keen that young people, not through some formalised ceremony, but young people moving from adolescence to adulthood should feel the value of volunteering, should feel the value that they can provide to others and that they're valued themselves. I hope over the next day or two, I may be wrong, that the Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, may have something to say about the twin pillars of community service and of volunteering, of engaging young people, and I hope we can do this in Northern Ireland, in school with active citizenship, so that the programmes of reaching out to the community that Tom Hartley was talking about can be part of the curriculum, and that we can build on that post-16 for young people to learn the value of their own commitment and to be able to give to others. If we can get that off the ground in a much more substantial way than already exists, that would be a good thing. I make the distinction between community service and volunteering. I need to do this because I've been a trustee for 25 years. I was a trustee of community service volunteers, and I know that everybody in the room who's committed to volunteering would kill me and others if we mixed up the elements of community service, which might be part of tackling unemployment and engaging young people in education, and volunteering, which has to be voluntary. But the two can go alongside each other and hand in hand, and I hope we can get that right for the future. Bernard Crick was a great mentor of mine, and his commitment to active citizenship actually brought him to Northern Ireland. It was years after when I met him again, because I was a student of his at university, and I met him in a restaurant in London because we were about to engage with his working party on citizenship, and a number of politicians from Northern Ireland came in to the restaurant, and Bernard recognised them, and they came across and said hello to me, and Bernard looked up and they said, "Oh, Professor Crick," and he said, because he had a terrible stutter, Bernard, who died in December, he said, "I recognise some of you in the days when you weren't quite so peaceful as you are now," and one or two of them were from paramilitary organisations and then joined the political drive. And in the 1970s, Bernard was over here in Northern Ireland, long before it was possible to do so, trying to get the political to subsume the paramilitary. And I went to see Bernard in the hospice that he was in Scotland in December, and he remained a while. He couldn't help but introduce me to the nursing staff as his student. Still his student, but he taught me that active citizenship was the glue that holds our society together. That without it, we can have the formal politics, and we know we need the formal politics. In Defence of Politics was a book that Bernard wrote 45 years ago, which was about how to assert the elected, the democratic, over the unfettered market, over now see the absolute imperative of reasserting that form of politics here and globally. Think global, act local has never been more opportune in terms of the world where financial institutions and the big mega corporations and the market have collapsed, and we need that form of politics to ensure that we don't have a complete meltdown. But actually underneath it, and this is really what I wanted to say this morning, underneath that is the real world in which people live out their lives. And whatever we do in terms of restoring the global economy and the decisions taken in Westminster yesterday and being taken across the world, it's actually underpinning that, filling the vacuum in our social and civic and civil lives that will be the real make or break. People, against all the odds over the years to come, are going to have to come together and build on what's already there, reinvent those mutual societies, re-engage in bigger numbers in terms of helping each other. In other words, to find solutions to our immediate problems for ourselves rather than expecting someone else to do it for us. Of course you can't do it on your own. We need government to put the resources, the backing, the commitment. We need local government and civil servants to understand that the voluntary sector and volunteering is not a substitute for doing things in a more traditional way, but an absolutely crucial adjunct and support system to it. And I just want to say one or two things about that, because you're reinventing local government in Northern Ireland with the 11 authorities replacing the 26. I think we need continuity of funding, and we need consistency, and we need policies that are about engaging people in every part of their life, whether it's at work or in the community, whether it's faith groups or whether it's those who are giving of their time in the trade union movement and formal politics. But we need to understand as well that as we change the terms of reference, we don't end up with a new bureaucracy. See, on the mainland, we've had this new jargon of commissioning and contracting for some time. And what's happening with commissioning is that people are asking the voluntary sector to provide services that those who are commissioning already know about. In other words, they're commissioning what already exists or they believe exists. Whereas actually what we need in terms of enterprise and innovation, social enterprise that many of you are engaged in, is to commission and grant aid and support what is possible for tomorrow, not simply what we did yesterday. So we need that imagination, we need that creativity, we need you to be using the power of the voluntary sector to be able to innovate in entirely new ways. And we need a compact that ensures that local and assembly government and the executive are backing and supporting people's innovation and enterprise on the ground, not stifling them. To do that, we need people in public office, not just the politicians, but officials at every level, to actually be willing supporters of volunteering and voluntary action, and the third sector, as it's called, rather than actually fearing it. There is still an enormous bureaucratic fear of what does this mean if we let go of the reins? What will it mean if we actually give people risk money? If we actually take a risk with what's happening? We're concerned, of course, with the audit process because it's our money, but we let people have a go. That creativeness that you're talking about here today has to be built into the system. And I find everywhere I go that there's still a reluctance to do so, that people are still not being engaged in designing policy, in making policy, and not just in fitting in where other people feel there's a gap. So, social enterprise, mutuals, cooperatives, people giving of themselves, all of this is really important, but it has to be seen as part of building that new civic society which holds us together. Now, to motivate people to do that is the big challenge, and it really does involve leadership skills. It's a few years now since I came to join with the Ulster People's College in looking at the leadership programme Academy in the UK, we're still miles off doing it properly. Spotting talent, nurturing people who have got a spark but just need that extra confidence building, that extra input to actually make it possible for them to do the job. And I hope that from today you might feel a way in which you could guide us on the best way of spotting that talent, of encouraging people in their own lives to believe they can do it, and above all, to stop the bureaucracy killing it off. You see, the one thing we don't do is to reinvent formal executive or local government committee meetings in our own neighbourhoods and communities. You know, the one thing that I found when we were devolving services into the neighbourhood when I was leader of Sheffield City Council was the wonderful way in which the bureaucracy managed to produce the same volume of papers for small neighbourhood meetings that they were producing for our policy meetings and budget meetings. And of course, 3-inch thick pieces of gum for people who have just decided to give up a little bit of their time to contribute to developing and working with and building the social capital and the capacity of community is a sure way of killing off their enthusiasm and motivation. Apart from anything else, actually reading it was always designed as a way of ensuring that politicians didn't really know what was going on in the bureaucracy in the first place. So I always used to turn to the recommendations and then work backwards. But it's absolutely crucial that we don't reinvent what we do in the formal when we're dealing with the informal, because the challenge is going to be enormous. If we're going to value people, and the value of people is what we're talking about today, we've got to understand that we've got other challenges on top of the immediate economic and unemployment worries that we have. We've got an ageing population, we've got changes in our social life, which means that family and community are increasingly breaking down and dysfunctionality occurs in new ways. And there is no political and top-down solution to that. That is very much about reinventing the old ways of coming together and working together. And if there's an example of that happening in the United Kingdom, is of course here in Northern Ireland. And all I wanted to just say at the end is that I think that you've got a hell of a lot now going for you, because people are committed, energised to coming together to make it work. We need to learn from what you're doing and energise ourselves across the UK. But we also need to understand that it is fragile, that people need the support to actually make the support systems work on the ground. They need to know that they're valued. They need to know that what people are doing in giving their time isn't taken for granted, but is seen as building those most important assets of all, the community assets that keep us going through the most difficult times. And I've been very pleased in pulling together a document for Gordon Brown called Mutual Action, Common Purpose. It took us longer to design the title than it did to write the document. But it sums up, in my view, what we need to do. And it puts forward a whole range of recommendations, some of which are already beginning to be implemented from the Westminster Parliament. If we can get this right, we don't need to worry about the future, because we'll have reinvented